1. Since early childhood, I have been intrigued by the paranormal. But it wasn't until my late teens that I became convinced. These are just a few of the significant events that happened between 2008 and 2010. In 2008, I moved into a large shared house with 3 friends in the northeast of England. It was an old Victorian-era house with large rooms, high ceilings, and hardwood floors. The kitchen and living room were downstairs, a bathroom and 3 bedrooms upstairs, including mine, and 1 large loft conversion room. All of the bedrooms were locked from the outside when no one was in them. Shortly after we all moved in, we started to notice weird things happening around the house. There would be random thumps and door bangs that we tried to brush off as being from the neighbors on either side, or even just the general sounds of an old house. I lived there for 2 years and things got progressively worse. Myself, my housemates, and multiple guests all heard disembodied, playful singing, coming from the loft room when no one was there, and the door was locked shut. We also regularly heard heavy footsteps coming from the loft room, but only when the door was locked, and no one was up there. On one occasion, my girlfriend and I were in bed, and there was a constant rhythmic knocking coming from my wardrobe. I remember her asking me what it was, and I loudly said, "Stop it!" Immediately it stopped. Occasionally things would fall off my shelves that were too heavy to simply fall off balance. We talked about these events a lot in the house, and generally agreed that there were 2 spirits there, one upstairs and one downstairs. We got a more playful vibe from whatever was upstairs. The knocking, singing, footsteps, and moving of objects made us think it may have been the ghost of a small child, just wanting to cause mischief. We called her Rosie without thinking too much of it. Downstairs was a different story entirely. The kitchen and living room became uncomfortable places to be when alone. You'd want to walk past the doors quickly to avoid looking in. A number of times, myself and other housemates had briefly seen the faint shape of a woman staring in the direction of the window in the living room. I'd once seen a huge black shadow in the corner of the room and bolted for the front door as I went to uni. These sightings usually happened during the day. Friends who stayed over would talk about waking up in the middle of the night and feeling a sense of terror and seeing a large black shadow standing over them. We all felt like whatever was downstairs was angry and female. There was a storage cupboard next to the kitchen. A female friend was dared to sit in the cupboard for a minute after she was joking about our supposed haunted house. She was in there for about 20 seconds before she began screaming to be let out. She was in a state of panic for a while after, and refused to come back to the house. One thing we noticed was if anything was moved or reorganized in the house, such as a change in housemates or rearranging furniture, the activity in the house would increase for a brief period. One day, I received a panicked phone call from a housemate's girlfriend. She asked if I was home as she thought she was alone and heard a large bang and some movement in my room. I was out, and when I returned home I found her sat outside the front door chain-smoking. When I unlocked my bedroom door, one of my guitars had come off its stand against gravity and was lying strings down on the floor, around 3 feet from the stand. A few glass tumblers that were on my desk were in the middle of the room, upright. The weirdest occurrence was when I was home alone. We'd just had a new girl move into the house for a few months. She rang my mobile phone, sounding confused, asking who had just used our house phone to ring her grandfather who was elderly and couldn't get to the phone in time to answer it. It was the first time I'd ever been completely frozen. The house phone was on the wall outside of my bedroom, and I'd been the only person home all day. I quickly picked up a few things and left the house until the others would be home. I'll admit, this could have been an electrical malfunction, but it still scared the hell out of me. The first housemate who lived in the loft room was one of the most outgoing people I'd ever met. He was always the center of attention and got on well with everyone. After a few months of living in that room, he started to change. He stopped going out for drinks with his friends, and eventually stopped hanging out downstairs with the rest of us in the house. Soon after, we'd only see him either on his way out the house to work or briefly when he came home from work. He stopped cooking in the kitchen and would order food to be delivered every night. He would spend all of his time out of work in his room, and decided to move out after around 9 months, cutting off contact with all of us. One of the other guys took over his room when he left, and a very similar change occurred. He became antisocial, and his easygoing nature turned sour and aggressive. Towards the end of our tenancy, things seemed to be amplified. The other roommates and I upstairs and our partners described being punched on the forehead while sleeping on different occasions. The only way I could describe it was like a blunt force like a forearm on the forehead. A roommate's girlfriend experienced this. Her and my roommate burst into my room around 3 a.m. She was crying and he was visibly shaken. You can dream and imagine things in sleep, but there's definitely a difference when something impacts your body with force. Just before we moved out, we had a small house fire that we couldn't explain. At around 4 a.m. the smoke alarm started to go off. We made our way downstairs to find that the whole downstairs and upper landing were filled with smoke. An oven glove had fallen off its hook and onto one of the rear oven hobs, which was on full heat. Everyone had work and uni the next day, so no one was using the oven at 4 a.m. The dials on the hob needed to be turned almost 360 degrees to reach setting 9, so this couldn't really be explained as a fluke. I don't really know who or what was in that house. There's no public history on the house or even the street that would provide context or explanation. All I know is there were multiple situations where something would happen and everyone in the room would hear or witness it. I never experienced anything that couldn't be explained rationally since. 2. 10 years ago, when I was 14, myself, my cousin, and friend all had what I can only describe as a demonic experience on Halloween. I wanted to see if anyone else has had a similar experience or knows what this could have been. So Halloween, 10 years ago, and the three of us decided it would be scary to walk through the woods nearby where I lived. I knew my way around well as I had grown up going there. We were walking along, chatting as we approached the middle of the woods. By a hollowed-out tree, I see a yellowish glow. I stopped where I was, and my cousin and friend also stopped. I just stared at this glow as it got brighter, and they did too. We all glanced at each other with a WTF look on our faces. I'm literally thinking I'm imagining things or something, but they both confirmed they were seeing the same thing. In the glow, a young girl appeared. She looked to be about 8 years old, and was dressed in a dress that looked to be from the Victorian times and had pigtails hanging down either side of her face. She started off looking quite washed out in color, and kind of transparent. She became more of a solid-looking shape, and the glow got brighter. As we're watching this, we're all whispering, confirming what we're looking at. As the glow and the girl became more prominent, I went from feeling normal and in disbelief to feeling uneasy, then fear and dread. Then finally like we needed to get out of there, and that our lives were possibly in danger. I can't put into words all the feelings I felt, but none of them were good, and I've never felt anything like it. I could tell my cousin and friend felt it too. The glowing thing then moved closer to us. There were no footsteps, no sounds, no nothing. It then looked and felt as if it was dashing at us, and it was literally so close in front of us, I shouted, "Run!" We all grabbed hands and made a run past it toward the main road, where there was lots of light. We stopped briefly as we turned and couldn't see anything, and then suddenly it was there again. It was fast, and all we could see was this glowing person-like shape rushing towards us. We ran as fast as we could until we could see the main road. I glanced behind, and it wasn't far away at all. I grabbed my cousin and friend's hand again, and started pulling them down the steep hill as the main road was at the bottom of it. We stumbled and half fell down this hill, but managed to keep getting to our feet. I'm sure this was down to pure terror and adrenaline. We got to the path at the main road, and looked up at the woods, and the glow was there, clear as day at the top of it. It wasn't coming towards us at all anymore. We caught our breath, and were ranting about it to each other. We were all confirming what we had seen and felt. The glow was still at the top of the hill. It was as if there was an invisible boundary that it couldn't cross. We turned away from the woods, and when we looked back, it had moved behind a tree. It was almost as if it stood behind a tree watching us. We stood at the bottom of the hill by the main road looking at it for about 30 minutes, maybe longer. Eventually it was gone, and I just about saw a slight glow in the distance of the woods, then moving. The three of us have spoken about this on and off for 10 years, and still the experience is clear as day. It's so hard to put that feeling of fear and need to get out of there into words. We returned a week later because we all knew what we saw, and we wanted to check there was no possible way light could be shining there. It was literally pitch black. No light was visible, and we retraced our exact steps. Has anyone ever seen something like this, or even felt something like this? Extra information. My cousin's Nan was a white witch. She told us she knew something had happened before we told her about this experience. She told us she could feel the residual energy of a dark entity on us. She also said that we did the right thing by running, and that our gut feeling was right, and the night could have ended very differently. 3. A bit of backstory. The women in my family have always been what my mom calls freaky. My mother grew up with her grandparents and her aunts and uncle after her own mother passed away when my mom was quite young, so she was close to them. When my grandaunt, G.A. from here on, was very young, around 3, she was very sick. My mom thinks it was scarlet fever. She told my mom she remembers a man sitting at the end of her bed, as if he was minding her. She doesn't like to talk about it, so I don't know much other than she said it wasn't there to hurt her. It was there to keep her safe. When she and her husband moved out, one of the houses they lived in was old. My mom recalls that the hallways were cold and gave her a horrible feeling. G.A. used to hear chains dragging on the floor in that house. Again, that is all I know about it. When my mother was 7 or 8, she was sitting in the dining room of their house. One of her mother's nursing books was sitting on the floor near her. The book opened and all the pages went from one side to the other and closed again. She thinks it was her mother's way of letting her know she was there watching her. When I was 2-ish, my mom had a sepia-colored dream of walking up a pathway through a beautiful garden full of sweet peas, to bring me to meet a woman she had never met before. But this woman wasn't a stranger. My mom knew her name. Her name was Joanna. She woke up knowing this dream was significant. She told the story to my father's mother, and she went pale. My grandmother told her that her own mother loved sweet peas, and her name was Joanna. My mom went to a psychic sometime between 2004 and 2002. The psychic told her a woman with a name starting with D wanted to tell her she was proud of her. In a country of Marys and Bridgets, a D name wasn't a safe bet, so I'm sure it wasn't just cold reading. My grandmother's name was Della. The psychic also told my mom she was pregnant, and that her son would do great things. Mom thought she was mad until she found out she was pregnant a few weeks later. Granted, I have a sister, but close enough. Another freaky thing my mom witnessed was her cousin. They were driving around town in the west of Ireland that they knew. They wanted to visit the castle there. They parked the car and started walking towards it. They saw something in one of the windows, and a sudden feeling of dread fell over both of them. They turned back. Now researching that castle, there's a tale of a locked room in it. What was locked in it, I have no idea. An exorcist was found dead in it in the 1920s, and it hasn't been tampered with since. Recently she brought me there, and even just looking at it from the car, I felt physically sick. I was terrified to get out of the car. There is just something that does not want you there. If you want to have a look at it, it's the Carrigaholt Castle, but there's not much online. Now even just reading this to her, the hair is standing up on the back of her neck. Something my mom, my sister, and I all experienced is my grandfather, Papa. He passed away in November 2016. No one expected it. That man had more lives than a cat. I think it's important to say that my mom and her father didn't have the best relationship. 3 weeks after that, the TV in my mom's room would be playing fine, and suddenly turn off the TV or mute the sound. She also said that she felt someone sitting at the end of her bed, not a bad feeling, but unnerving. She wasn't scared, but a little freaked out. Our house also would fill with the smell of tobacco smoke. None of us smoke, but Papa was a heavy smoker for most of his life. After about a week of this happening, Mom sat on her bed with burning sage. She spoke to him, acknowledged he was there, but told him he needed to leave, that he was freaking her out. Mom describes the feeling after that conversation as someone opening all the windows and letting the light in. Everything went back to normal. Sometimes we still smell the smoke and feel him there, but we think he doesn't feel the need to show himself as much because we understand. It's nice to be able to say hi to him. I was in hospital recently to get my gallbladder removed, and I was quite nervous for the surgery and to be alone in a hospital, as it was 2 weeks before my 17th birthday. I never felt alone, though. There was a sensor tissue dispenser for the nurses next to my bed, so they could wash their hands before doing things with my IV, and it would go off randomly. I asked the nurses if it had happened before, and they said no. My aunt, Papa's stepdaughter, is a total skeptic, visited us from America in April. We warned her not to be freaked out if anything happens, but she brushed it off, thinking we were being dramatic. It's important to note she lived with him from when she was 8 to 16, so she knows his mannerisms well. She fell asleep on the couch after a long day. We just left her as she was still battling the jet lag, and it was pretty late anyway. We said we would wake her before we headed to bed. After about 20 minutes, she jolted awake. This is when we decided to go to bed. The next morning at breakfast, she told us that what woke her was a dream. She saw him as a young man, shrugging on his coat. She said it was so vivid. It was as if she could reach out and touch him. Now on to me. We've had a lot of cats in our house. We have had cats that have decided they want to adopt other humans, as cats do. We have fostered cats until they can get forever homes, and of course, we have had cats pass. It's always an awful feeling when they do. What I have always found comforting is that they come back to me after. Whether I sense them or feel them jumping onto my bed, or see a part of them. It's always comforting, but I'm never quite sure if I'm seeing them or if it's my mind's way of coping. Well, in December 2016, I lost my dog, Daisy. It was the hardest thing I have ever went through. I have no memories before her. Daisy and Papa had a special bond. She was his dog's daughter. We adopted another dog in January to help my other dog deal with the loss of her. He helped us heal as well, but I was still upset that I hadn't seen her. With the cats, it felt like their way of telling me they were okay. One day in March, I was home alone and went to the kitchen to put an apple core in the bin. I stumbled over what I thought was our new dog, but suddenly there was nothing at my feet, and both our dogs were in the other room. I've seen her twice since. Now if you got to the end, congratulations, I know that was wrong, and a bit sappy. I'll reward you with the one time I felt unsafe because of a spirit. I was laying in bed in the middle of the day, sick, watching my phone, facing my door. My room goes cold, but my window is closed. I take no notice of it, and pull the covers up over me. I look up to see the handle of my door slowly move down, and my door opens. It's not just a gust of wind. The door opens slowly and suddenly stopped. I ring my mom, too scared to move. She comes up and she feels the presence. She gets the sage and starts telling whatever it was to leave, but stops in the middle of talking. She tells me she felt a hand on her shoulder. Needless to say, I didn't go into my room alone for over a week. 4. So this happened to me a few years back. I had an experience on the Queen Mary that I thought I should share because of the effect that it has had on me. Keep in mind I have no physical evidence of this. I just thought it was an interesting story that you guys would probably like to hear. So a little backstory. I do some work for a club, and a few years back we ended up having an event on the grounds of the Queen Mary. Being that we were literally right in front of the ship, we decided to hold our monthly meeting in a ballroom on the ship. I was a late teen, and since I was out of state, I was with my family. I also happen to be, and still am, a huge fan of paranormal investigation, and I practically grew up on ghost hunters and Destination Truth. I've always believed in the paranormal, but I am extremely skeptical of paranormal things just because of the noisy world we live in. It's for that reason that I'd always held a fantasy of doing a paranormal investigation. And when I heard that we were going to one of the most notoriously haunted locations, I couldn't contain myself. Anyway, we're on the ship and we're doing the meeting, and I'm literally wearing a lei made out of money. Don't ask why I was wearing it, but it's important regardless. I did my duties at the meeting, and after the meeting was done, I decided to go take a bathroom break whilst my parents and brothers socialized. Now, the thing about the bathroom that I went to on the Queen was that it was kinda small. It was a solid 2-stall bathroom with 1, maybe 2 urinals with a very, very squeaky door. It was a carpeted hallway, but the bathroom had tile everywhere, and pipes and whatnot all over the ceiling. There was 1 deck above me, with my current deck being on level or 1 above the bow of the ship. Point being, you could hear a pin drop in that room with all the tiling. So I pick a stall and start doing my business. But while I was in there, I had an idea. Why not do an EVP session? I certainly had a phone on me to record, but I thought better of recording myself pooping and decided against it. Instead, I simply asked a few questions, knock a few times, and see if I could get a response. Now, at around this time, very few people were on the vessel as far as I could tell. It was in the evening, and that usually means that it's around time for tourists to go eat or go back to their motels. But nevertheless, the sound of footsteps clanked and thumped on the deck above me. High heels, boots, children running back and forth. Simply awful to get knocks out of anything. That said, when I did the shave and a haircut knocks, I got the 2 knocks back. It was soft, but every time I did it, I would always get the last 2 knocks. I then decided to go with some questions. 1 knock for yes and 2 for no. I asked a few questions like, are you a man, to which the answer was a no, and did you die here, also, which the answer was a no. I asked a few other questions, but the stampede going on above me made that impossible. Satisfied, I decided to finish up and step over to the sink. This was where I asked to be touched. I was touched. At least, I think I was touched. Now, remember that lei that I spoke about? I had taken it off at this point, but being made of money made it itchy. So the sensation on my shoulder could have been made from the lei being on my shoulder for so long. And the desire to feel something touching me might have created a placebo effect. Inflammation after I had taken it off before a lengthy bathroom chat. I don't know, but it's noteworthy. As I left the bathroom with my head in the clouds after speaking to a ghost, I found my family outside waiting for me. I mentioned what had happened, and they were glad for me, though I didn't want to go into too much detail then and there. I waited until we got into the car where I explained what had happened from the top. I went through the knocks, the touch, and I lamented the footsteps ruining my EVP session. That's where things got a bit interesting. See, when I told my family about the footsteps, they had no idea what I was talking about. They never heard anything. There were no footsteps on the deck above. The hallway outside couldn't have created that amount of sound because it was carpeted. And someone entering the room to mess with me was out of the question, because I would have heard the door open. The footsteps that had ruined my EVP session were my EVP session. It's kind of funny now that I think about it. I was literally angry with the disembodied noises for messing up my investigation into disembodied noises. To this day, I still regret not recording it to play back. But then again, I was still taking a dump, so perhaps not. 5. Several years before I met my wife, her mom had passed away. Her mom was a highly regarded RN at the local hospital and worked with surgeons and doctors. She had learned that she needed a heart valve replacement surgery and had scheduled it, and was confident it would be an ordinary operation. The operation was being done by the surgeons she worked with, so there was an added comfort that she was in good hands. While the surgery itself went without a hitch, after it was completed, the doctors could not get her heart restarted to beat on its own. They transported her from Cincinnati to Louisville, Kentucky, to a well-known heart hospital, but after several days it was apparent they would not be able to get her heart to beat on its own, and so decided to turn off life support and let her pass. Flash forward to several years later when I met my now wife. It was uncanny, all of the similar things we shared in common. Though she was living in Louisville, she was from Cincinnati. Her best friend's dad owned a church right up the street from my house. We knew similar people, and we just clicked, and felt like the other was the one we had been searching for all this time. On my first visit down to Louisville to see her, it happened to be the anniversary of the loss of her mom. It felt like a sad day was given an option to be a better day. It was like Mom had tried to bring her joy to cheer her up. We joked that her mom must have been aligning the stars to bring us together. We eventually got married and had the first of 2 boys. There were many times that my wife struggled with not having her mom around. Not there for the wedding, not there for the birth or the kids to be there to play with them. And do the things grandmothers do. At the time, my wife had to work occasionally on the weekend at her job as a mental health therapist. It was one chosen by her to try and help others based on the grief she had worked through on her own. My son Grant was probably just a few months old, if that, and so it was just him, the cat, and me alone in the house on this particular Saturday. Grant had always been a nightmare to get to sleep. It was frustrating, spending 30 minutes rocking him to get him to close his eyes, trying to silently back out of the room, and stepping on a squeaky floor plank to have him snap back awake. The life of parents. After probably an hour of trying to get him to nap, I was finally able to tiptoe backwards out of the room without him waking. I left the door open as new parents do, afraid to leave him out of my sight on my watch. Nothing was on in the house, no radio, no TV, and the sound of no crying felt great. Shortly after, I walked into the bathroom to wash my hands, and for a moment was standing looking at my reflection in the mirror, thinking about nothing in particular. Then I heard in a normal speaking voice the sound of a woman coming from my son's bedroom, but also maybe in my head say, "I love you." It was in a very tender, sincere way a loving mother admires her child. A chill ran up from my toes to my hair, and I froze, because I knew no one else was home and the house was otherwise silent. I slowly got the nerve back up and peeked into the open bedroom, and no one was there. Since then, nothing really has happened again. The house never felt ominous or haunted in any way. I believe that she had come to see her firstborn grandchild in person, and the experience was pretty amazing. I told my wife, and she is still skeptical and questioned why her mom did not appear to her. I believe it is because I am more open to the paranormal, whereas she is more logical and fact-based. After the birth of our second son, we moved to a new house, and here and there I've had little things happen. Lights turning on by themselves, the dog staring for 15 minutes straight at the corner of the room on multiple occasions. So maybe she is still there, watching over and being grandma from above. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to 5 True Paranormal Stories, episode 149. And thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. Also, I'd like to give a special shout out to Randy Spalding, the author of the 5th story there. Randy has a YouTube channel that also deals with, well, sports among other things, but also paranormal, like EVP. There's a few EVP sessions on there, going back about 6 years. Most recent one was a month ago, so the channel is still active. I will include a link in the description next to Randy's story. That'll be right next to the story, because some people had trouble finding it the last time, so just so you know where it is. If I forget to put the link, just throw a cabbage at me or something and I'll remember. Okay, and with that I'm going to head off for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.